Thank you very much, Oliver, and welcome to this main panel discussion at the Learning, Teaching and Student Experience Festival from the Chartered Association of Business Schools. It's great to be with you this afternoon. My name is Robert MacIntosh, and it's my very great privilege to be the chair of the Chartered Association of Business Schools at the moment. And we have a discussion this afternoon with three speakers who could not be more international, nor indeed more timely and relevant to today's topic of conversation, the changing nature of business and management education. And goodness, business management education is changing in and of itself anyway, but we've had something of an accelerant with a global pandemic and a switch to different modes of learning in this sphere online as well as in lots of other regards. We will have three short introductory statements from our three speakers who I'll introduce in a moment, and then we'll open for some question and answers. And I'm sure if some of you have been at other sessions earlier in the festival this week, you'll be familiar now with the right-hand side of your screen having a chat facility, but also having a Q&A facility. So if you could put your comments into the Q&A session, that would be great, and we'll pick those up as we go along. So I'll just take a few moments to introduce our speakers, and then I'll say a little bit about the topic, and then we'll hand over to our first speaker. So I'm delighted to be joined today by Caryn Beck-Dudley, who is the Chief Executive of the AACSB, an organisation that I am sure is familiar to many of you. And Caryn took over her role at AACSB in June of this year, so she's fresh into role during a relatively calm period where nothing much has changed in particular. But she joins us both with that remit from AACSB and as a serial dean from other business schools, and really I think will have a lot to tell us. Our most recent appointment was at Santa Clara, but she's also an employment law specialist, and I think we will have a lot to learn from how the AACSB's new standards are shaping business education for us. Our second speaker today is Tony, and Tony joins us from one of our sponsor organisations, McGraw-Hill. I'm very grateful to McGraw-Hill and our other sponsors for the conference as a whole, but Tony's here today as President of International for McGraw-Hill, a role which he took up as long ago as May of 2020, and again shows a fantastically quiet period to switch roles in a very international organisation. Tony has a background in finance and was an auditor at PwC before he moved into the publishing world. He's worked in a variety of roles in McGraw-Hill and is currently responsible for products that are published in over 75 languages in over 100 countries, which is quite international enough for almost anybody, I think. And I think the role and relationship between publishing and academia is changing as we speak, and I really look forward to hearing Tony's perspective on how that relationship will unfold over the next period of time. And our third speaker this morning is Leila, who joins us from Imperial College, where she's an associate dean. And Leila is international in and of herself, in that she's lived in 8 countries and speaks 4 languages. Speaking as someone who lives in one country and speaks only just about one language, that's intimidating enough. But she's got extensive experience at Imperial and elsewhere in programme design and a special interest in business development and strategy and innovation. And I am sure hearing from the cold face of one particular business school's perspective will help round out our conversation. I said
Robert, can I just
Sure.
stop you there a moment? Leila seems to have dropped off for some reason. We're going to try and bring her back.
Well, there's a good reason we came to Leila third then. Hopefully she'll have reappeared by then. And she can re-watch the recording of the introduction. I said at the beginning I would offer just a perspective on the changing nature of business and management education. I think it's changing in lots of ways. It was changing in and of itself anyway. I think our student population is changing because we are now beginning to see coming into our business schools at undergraduate and postgraduate levels people who have extensive chronological time as a proportion of their lifespan in a digital environment. So our school leavers coming into undergraduate programs have been immersed in this since before they could do anything, and many of our executives joining postgraduate programs have spent a lot of their life in that space, and so that's producing one kind of change. What I would call the pandemic-induced digital pivot, to give it a technical description, has meant that all of us have had to move fairly quickly to new ways of delivering, and I think that's changing the nature of our education. But of course, that same pandemic-induced pivot has applied to all of the organisations that our graduates go on to work in, and I'm sure we'll hear that from Tony maybe as a perspective too. And I think therefore the kinds of roles and the kinds of skill set required to lead in those organisational settings is changing. So this is a really timely conversation, and I look forward to hearing your questions once we've heard from our three speakers. And with that, as a warm thank you to everybody for participating and a warm welcome to everybody for dialing in, I'll pass to Caryn to start us. Thanks, Caryn.
Thanks, Robert, and I'm thrilled to join Tony and Leila on this panel. For many of you might know that last year I was actually invited to speak at this conference as well, in my role as the past chair of AACSB and the dean of Santa Clara University, which for those of you who don't know it is in Silicon Valley, California. Wow, does 1 year make a difference? We were in London last year, and now I'm sitting at my townhouse in Tampa watching it rain outside. So last year I spoke on transformation and disruption in higher education. And it's not lost on me that my remarks last year really focused on technology disruption. Who would have known that it's a virus that's disrupting everything around us, and that technology so far hasn't saved us? So with that in mind, I am currently the CEO and president of AACSB. I've been a longtime volunteer for AACSB and was excited to be able to take on this new role. For those of you who aren't that familiar with us, we are a 100-year-old institution, an association. We're the largest association for business education globally. And we are mostly known as an accreditor, but we're also a connector, a convener of business schools. And really, we bring business schools and businesses together to create the next generation of leaders, not just business leaders, but leaders in general. Our standards ensure that business schools contribute to relevant, impactful thought leadership. And we're in 100 countries and territories. Our collective strength is our diverse perspectives, our global mindset, and our commitment to creating positive social change. So with that, let me turn to COVID-19. Many of us thought, and I was one of these, that it would be a sprint with COVID-19. We'd sprint, we'd get out of it. It would be tamped down and we would be done. Now we know it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And so those are very, very different strategies to dealing with the COVID-19. We're also seeing in our members, and many of you will experience this because we're a global organization. This is a local, well, it's a global pandemic. It has local impact. So some business schools are not as impacted as others. Some are hugely impacted. And it's not just viral, but it's also financial. And so that's causing it to be a really interesting issue for business schools worldwide. Most business schools had to fast track to online. Most of the online was what would we call remote learning, not true online learning. And as we all know, remote learning is very different than an online environment. Remote learning is basically you put your notes up, you go on Zoom, and you continue with what you've done in the past. That is not a high quality online experience, as we all know. And schools who have had to continue to be online through the fall in the Western Hemisphere really are looking at much more strategies with that. I've been really proud of business schools. They exhibited incredible agility and everything changed for business schools as well as universities in general. And the responsiveness of business schools to the global concern was actually heartening. But I do want to mention, I think the panel will get more into this. We all know that education is more than just subject matter education. And this has really shown that. Our students can get their subject matter from YouTube or from a variety of other sources. And I think Tony will speak more to that, they don't necessarily need faculty to give them subject matter. So what do we do with experiential learning? What do we do about the student experiences which round out their higher education? What's the role of the professor and student interactions? And the added complexity of balancing health and safety of not only our students, but our faculty and staff. It's doubly complicated, as you all know, for students to travel and study outside their own country, and the hesitancy to be able to do that, or actually the practicality of being able to do that. And then I'm also looking at higher ed as an ecosystem, and we have to reevaluate all of our hundreds of year-old rules. And some of these, I think Leila and Tony will also talk about, but that's not just textbooks, But what's the role of admission tests, if any? What's the role of grading coursework, if any? What does course content actually mean? What are contact hours? What are subjects? Do subjects even matter anymore? Is a degree even important? What's our time to graduation? Does that matter? Is graduation, the concept of graduation, actually a relic of the past? So 2 months ago, AACSB actually announced its new standards. Luckily, they were in process for 2 years. They are principle-based, and I think appropriately outcome-based, not input-based. So what do the accredited business schools do with the students once they come to their school? The outcomes we're interested in are what are the learning outcomes of the students? Notice I don't say students anymore, we call them learners. What are the research outcomes? Are our business schools that are accredited, are they creating positive social impact? And really our new business standards, accreditation standards, are focused on a school's mission as well as their strategy to accomplish their mission. We welcome all schools that are interested in improving higher education and business education in particular worldwide, but our accredited schools really need to stand to a higher standard of creating that social impact and creating the learners of the future with what they do. So with that, I will turn it over and look forward to your questions. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Cam, and really interesting opening remarks from Caryn, and the idea that the pandemic has turned into a marathon, not a sprint, is beginning to dawn on the whole of the economy, I think, not just HE. And so I look forward to picking that up in the Q&A. Could I turn next to Tony?
Sure, Robert. Can you hear me well? And thanks for this very nice introduction, and thanks, Caryn, as well for, I mean, you covered a lot, right? And there's a lot to cover actually today. So I hope everybody had a great event so far. I mean, I'm very happy to be in this panel discussion today. And I know actually everybody is very busy this month. So I really appreciate that everybody is taking the time. Business and management schools had to go through incredible changes to remain relevant and in a fast changing world. And a publisher like us need to remain relevant too. It is interesting to read so many articles where we are still actually classified as a traditional publishers when our offering has been evolved so much over the past years. When you think about it, our higher education business in US is now close to 90% digital. It was actually 75% before COVID. I guess traditional just means that actually we have been part of the ecosystem for so long, more than 100 years, 125 years for McGraw-Hill. And we are also probably being compared to the many newcomers in the education space. Of course, we are still publishers because we need great content, but content has to evolve. And you said it very well, because students consume content in a very, very different way these days. And when I talk about actually content and digital, I'm not talking about flat ebooks, which is just as good as print, right? With just a quick search engine. I'm talking about courseware, platform, digital resources, everything that actually is designed to improve student engagement and also to improve outcome, right? And that's what we are talking about. We have been positioning ourselves as a service provider and partner to business schools around the world for a few years, and to help them transform their online courses offering, and also to improve and provide engaging student and online provisions, right? That's what our business is about now. It is fair to say that COVID-19 has accelerated this transition. We had to move fast globally to issue an immediate response to COVID. And it's fair to say that our teams have never been so busy since March. We had to onboard and train lots of existing customers to make a quick shift online. We decided to open up resources for free to schools and faculties to help them to complete the end of the academic term. This is not just us, right? So as far as I'm aware, most of our competitors have done actually a similar response, right? As a result, and as Caryn said, it's actually a long-term change. I mean, the world will never be the same. We have transitioned our old model into working into a real partnership with business schools. We are investing heavily to make transition to online learning as smooth as possible to all our customers. During many years, our main contact in a business school and higher education and faculties has been academics, right? Adopting our product. We are now engaging at a very, very different level. That includes IT, CFOs, deans of course. This is actually a big, big change for us. It is clear that COVID has accelerated print decline, has also accelerated digital transformation, and that's actually a very good news for everyone. When I was in the business school back in the mid-90s, I remember my first accounting course, my first accounting textbook, very good content, a very good lecturer, excellent lecturer, but still a very, very static experience. Surely not the most engaging experience, right? It's actually interesting that I decided to do a career in finance after that. This is luckily very, very different today, right? And that's actually a good thing for everyone. In partnership with faculties and business school, we will continue to deliver more digital-first content that can be both customized and improved with our advanced technology solutions. That include AI, adaptive assessment, assignment, videos, of course, in order to deliver a much more engaging online experience. We will also provide things that are new to us, right? Professional development, analytics as well. And on this note, I mean, we invest heavily in analytics and data to ensure we have the metrics to measure success and improve outcomes. And on this last point, and that's actually really a change to our DNA, this transition, and that's actually very clear to everyone, also impacts our team, right? And our entire organization, as we need to rethink every single function across our organization. Fulfillment, digital, all the things that were not necessarily part of our DNA 10 years ago, all these need to be rethought, right? This is indeed a very challenging time, but this is also a very challenging, a very exciting time for everyone. So thank you, and over to you, Robert.
Thank you, Tony. And I guess, given the emphasis on partnering in what Tony said from the world of publishing to academia, the fact that our academic models have been turned upside down in such a short space of time means that the organisational partner has to be turned upside down. So really interesting to hear Tony talking about quite how dramatic the changes have been in terms of the aspects of your organisation in order to meet those new demands. And I'm sure there's lots that we'll come back to there. So thirdly, having heard from a body which represents a whole group of business schools and a partner organisation that tries to provide great content and innovate, let's hear right from the coalface of an associate dean in one of our prestigious business schools in Imperial. So Leila, can I turn to you for our third contribution?
Thank you, Robert. And I'm glad I'm back. Sorry for the technological interruption. So I want to reflect a little bit on what we've been saying so far. And I don't know about you, but for us at Imperial College, the last 6 months have been very much about managing the crisis. It was crisis mode on since March. We moved all of our students online, and we've been since then working harder than ever to make sure that now that we welcomed our students back, we could deliver the student experience and the academic model that deserve the quality and the reputation that Imperial has. And while we were in crisis mode, there was very clear that innovation was happening at a very accelerated mode. To be honest, I have seen innovations in all the student and academic areas that we work with in a path and in a rhythm that has never been so quick before. And so the reflection I want to share, my first reflection is that when we think about the lessons learned and when we think about what's going to happen over the next years, it's important for us to reflect on how can we actually move to from crisis mode to a permanent change, to a permanent, the marathon that Caryn was talking about, to a permanent mood around innovation. And it is true that even before the pandemic, business schools were at a crossroad. It was impacted by technology. It was impacted by new competitors, by new habits as well from our students, and also recruiters' need had reflected that. So for us right now, the question is, how are we going to take advantage of this crossroad? And bearing in mind that there has been a lot of doom and gloom over the last years around higher education and business schools, and it has actually not reflected more into just us increasing the mood for more and the mood for more innovation. So that's a bit of the first reflection I wanted to share. The second reflecting is going back to what students want. Is there is a new leadership paradigm? I see one of the questions is, are we here in a new paradigm? I do think we are. Students are consuming knowledge in a different way, and we have to adapt to that. Technology is now an integrated part of everything we do. At Imperial College, obviously, we're a STEM institution. We have the scientists, the engineers who've been embracing everything that the business school do and showing us also the way. And so for us, using technology has been a very fascinating way to create a new way of delivering programs. To give you one example is the use of machine learning to predict student performance, how you can incorporate AI and AR to make the classroom experience more exciting, and also adapt to a new kind of diversity. Which brings me to my third point. Diversity has also evolved. If we know one thing of the last 12 months is that we're not doing enough to understand the true richness of diversity in higher education, in management education. And so for us, it's a wake-up call in the last 6 to 12 months around what is our responsibility to make sure that we're embracing that diversity, but also creating a student body that can learn and have a bigger impact on the world. And just a final reflection around, we have a role to play. We are not just here leading, we're creating role models. 2 years ago, they were saying the death of the expert, that's long gone. We are certainly still with full value on, and we have to challenge as well. Caryn mentioned accreditations. What about rankings? Are rankings really reflecting the value we give our students in their professional journey, in their personal journey? And so I think it's a very exciting time. I don't want to underestimate at all the grave impact of the pandemic, but there are some really good opportunities here, and they will go through collaboration, embracing of technology, and reflecting on what our value actually is.
Thank you, Leila. And I think that last point that you were raising there about the importance of diversity and the opportunity that different modes of delivery give us to improve that diversity, both on the provider side, our academics, faculty and staff, and for our student communities, I think is a really important and noble cause that the business school community could do much to help shape future organisational leadership by influencing people's expectations of diversity during their education programme. So we have a couple of questions in the chat facility, and I've certainly got a couple of questions that I would like to ask. We'll start with the one which you touched on, Leila, which is whether or not this is a paradigm shift, and what about in particular from Lewis's question. Thank you, Lewis. I would like the three panelists to pick up on the ongoing economic impact. And I think if we could think about that in terms of the business schools as businesses themselves, there's a challenge there about our own sustainability, but also in the kinds of organisational roles that we're preparing people for. So can I maybe come back round in the order that we had as speakers in, just for convenience this time? So can I come to you, Caryn, first to think about the longer term paradigm shift?
I think the paradigm shift is longer term, and it's also going to be permanent. I don't see us going back to, hopefully we'll go back to the areas that are useful, but that we will be moving forward into a future. And the two areas I want to focus on, and hopefully Tony will pick more of this up, we no longer need like final grades. Products like his company produces can tell you what the students learn all the way through, and it can be very, very individualized in a group setting. And so that to me is one of those areas that can change and probably should change. Also, should we rank students in a class? I have a law degree. We were class ranked. But do you want an engineer who's like bottom of their class, or do you want everybody to be competent to do the work? And so I think that's actually an interesting question. And then economically, it's really different by region. In the US, many of our schools, business schools, are going to be seriously financially impacted because a lot of their revenue comes from room and board. And as one dean mentioned to me a couple of days ago. She goes, I didn't realize we were in the hospitality industry, but like a third or more of the revenue comes from students coming to campus, paying for room, paying for board, buying things at the bookstore, etc. And if that's gone, that's a big chunk of revenue. There's also, but then other places, and many of these are in Europe, where the government pays primarily for the education. The students don't pay very high tuition, if any tuition at all. They're not going to be as impacted as much as long as the governments will continue to impact it. So for me, in AACSB, what we're looking at is the financial models of different regions, different localities will have a huge difference on how the schools. And then just finally, and Leila will respond to this, many schools, especially in the UK and other places, are heavily dependent on those international students to travel, room and board, but as well as paying the high tuition. And if they're not there, then what's the financial model? So those are my thoughts on that. But financial disruption will occur, and it'll be pretty substantial depending on the region you're in.
Thanks for that, Caryn. Tony or Leila, do you want to add anything to that?
I mean, as I said, I think I said in my opening remarks that actually the world will never be the same. Of course, our US market has been always, I mean, far ahead of the rest of international, but as you said also, Leila, I mean, we have been actually adapting very quickly, right? So when I look at the kind of changes that we've seen over the past few months across international, especially for business school, right? I mean, clearly, I mean, the world would never be the same, right? And that's create actually an opportunity for business school as well. Think about actually, I mean, of course, we have very different business school and branding. I mean, you have some business schools that I would classify as local business school, and others that will actually have a big brands, right? But for those big brands, this is also a great opportunity with digital and digital resources and courseware to have, let's say, very different programs, and also actually an opportunity for them to actually diversify their funding by actually using their brand to actually set up a business or a partnership in other countries, in Asia, in India, whatever, where actually the need from the market might be actually slightly different. I mean, we know that a lot of business schools in US and the big names would probably prepare more to work for JP Morgan, right? But actually, we also know that we need actually a business school to actually just prepare to have actually very good CFOs for actually a BPO in India, right? And that's also actually why content needs to be customized, right? And also, I mean, why this also create actually, in my view, actually a great opportunity for business school, because it's fair to say that you have an issue with funding, right? So the change in this context, so the change is going to be actually a long-term change. I completely agree. And I just look at actually the number, and our teams have been busy over the past few weeks and few months. And that's going to be actually a good thing as well for for business school, because that gives them actually more opportunities, right, to actually diversify their funding and also actually probably look at their market and the global students in a different way.
I think if I can quickly add on my side, Robert, at Imperial College, or the online programs and the face-to-face programs of the business school have the same value, and they also have the same fee. And that's because we strongly believe in flexibility, and students have very different needs. What we've now developed is a multi-mode system that will permit in the future where students might be in the classroom, might be online. And I think it's important to mention, because it goes back to the business model, but it also goes to the fact that not all universities had been similarly developed in technology. And so what we believe is in open innovation and open collaboration. We've just established a partnership a few months ago with 10 other schools around the world, where we all help each other around the future of management, education, and technology. And this is a time where forums like this means that universities can reach out and say, I think they call it friend-petitors, where it's a combination with friends and with competitors. It's a time of where we have to work together, because we're not companies. We have a duty of care, and we do have impact on the students and on recruiters. So I think it's a time for this open innovation to happen in the technological front as well.
Thanks, Leila. There's another question from Natasha, which I want to come back to, but you come in, Caryn, and there's one thing I wanted to add.
I just wanted to add one thing on the rankings part, and hopefully we'll come back to this. Most of the ranking systems in the world are done by magazines, as we know, Zelda magazine, and they're also done on inputs for the school. And back to Tony's point, we need great graduates of schools all over the world. local, regional, etc. And they're very focused on the elite schools, which is the small population of the total path. And so I do think that will change with this. What AACSB is concerned about, the schools should be concerned about, is what happens once we get them, not who comes into us, and what kind of business leader we produce when they leave.
Yeah, thanks for that. So the thing I wanted to pick up from Leila's, did you say it was from friend-petitors, was that it?
I like
so
that.
I was interested, Tony, given the emphasis that you're beginning to place on partnering with schools to develop learning materials that are truly dynamic and so on. You must be in this unusual place of having to be friend-petitors with a whole selection of people, and are you in a series of monogamous relationships that you don't tell each other about, or how do you find that relationship with multiple schools who might be, in a sense, looking for their competitive edge, but looking to work with you exclusively? I don't know if Tony didn't hear that question. Did you hear it? Or?
Sorry, I think I couldn't hear the question. Sorry, Robert.
That was a brilliant question. It's such a shame, Tony. I was asking about McGraw-Hill's position as a partner in a range of different institutions who all are trying to find their own competitive edge, and how you find that dynamic between partnering but also trying not to share information inappropriately between other partner schools.
Yeah, I mean, that's been actually a very interesting change over the past few months. As I said, now we have to actually engage at a very, very different level with institutions, and that's a big change for our sales team as well. I mean, we now actually realize talking to academic is not just enough. This is actually interesting as well, to just realize business school and higher institutions, I mean, want to actually have one partnership, right? So rather than having to actually talk to a 5 or 6 publisher, I mean, they would want to have actually as much as possible one partnership. We might not be able always, even if we have a deep range of content, to actually provide all the content that they need, right? And that's probably actually means that I mean, we call our last generation of platform open learning platform. There will be actually a point, I believe, where, I mean, there will be actually content from a competition, I mean, sitting on our platform just to basically meet the needs of our customer, right? And just being able to, provide to faculties. And when I look at faculties, I mean, across a number of discipline, be able to actually provide that response to the need of the customer, right? Even if we have actually a very, very deep list, we may not actually have the list that will actually meet all the needs of one institution, right? And when we talk about open learning, right, long term, and we have already had some situations this year, we have actually content of a competitor sitting on our platform. So that's a big, big change to the actually overall landscape and for all the traditional publishers that we are.
Fantastic. So we've got a few minutes left, and there's a couple of questions, and then I would like to just make some closing comments. So Natasha's asked a really good question about digital inequality in the period that we're coming into, which all of us, I think everybody has said uniformly, we don't see this going back. This is irreversible. How do we handle that digital inequality? At Heriot-Watt, where I'm based, we've just launched a degree program, a master's program in a refugee camp by providing people with the entire contents on a digital tablet, which doesn't require constant access to mobile internet. But that's just one small example. What are your thoughts about digital inequality, given that the importance that Leila pointed to of diversity in our student communities as we go forward? Who would like to go first with some suggestions on how to address digital inequality?
I can add a few comments on my side. I think that's a really important topic for us. Widening participation and access to a global reach was something that was a big priority for Imperial College. And where we saw it, it went various ways. First of all, is trying to work on how to reach those students that might be facing the challenging situation, and how we can support them once they've joined us. So digital tools addressing any potential digital poverty was something that was in our mind, and we have taken actions around that. The second thing is linked also to understanding that in our case we have many international students, and it's also trying to find the softwares and the technology that is less complex, and therefore does not require necessarily those really big investments and those high profile Wi-Fi's, etc., etc. So that's keep it simple is one of the lemmas that we were trying to find. And the third point is also constant communication with our candidates, because there's so much you don't know, and this new it's not something we would maybe have asked 10 years ago. And so we have been having, I always call it the no stone unturned, make sure every candidate that comes to college has someone to reach out to, has someone that takes care of pastoral care and that they can speak to and address those concerns. I agree, this is just first steps. We're at the beginning of this journey for what we call the post-pandemic, but it's something that every school should bear in mind. We do need to reach every candidate and make sure that they can access education, as if they are highly qualified, they should certainly do.
And I see in the chat facility, Lewis suggesting that 5G might be a great enabler, and I think it will be for the more developed economies, but I guess that in some ways that exacerbates the tendency to go to the highest quality platforms with the most interactive features, which includes some and excludes others, as Leila's just pointed out. Anything that Caryn or Tony want to add in terms of inclusion?
Just quickly, we see huge differences between those of wealth and those not of wealth, including just if you're in your bathtub trying to stay away from your house where 5 or 6 other people live and are all trying to be on a very small Wi-Fi unit. So it's not just the hardware or the software, it's also a lot of students didn't want to reveal that was basically their personal background, and now they're almost forced to. And so I do think that it's a new time for compassion, like you said, wellness, and really thinking about what's the lowest common denominator to get the subject matter across so that everybody can participate in it. And sometimes it's print. Back to the old chalkboard that doesn't fail, neither does print. And so it'll be interesting to see how that evolves, but it definitely impacts students very, very differently. And it really has shown from the has and have nots, which is not what we want education to be.
So we've got 3 minutes left, and I'd really like to invite Tony to reflect on the challenge of thinking forwards to the amazing new facilities that AI and AR and digital platforms bring us for individualized learning, with the thing that Caryn's just pointed to, which is the kind of anchor back into the most commonly available, lowest cost, most reliable, most inclusive technologies, which could be print, for example.
I mean, when we talk about AI, we have to be actually very careful. We can talk that, and we can just, do a simple assessment, actually, typically in the beginning of the academic year, and just then, actually, most publishers actually can do actually a personal learning experience based on a simple assessment, right? Because we have actually enough data to do that. But what is really AI? And I just use actually a product called Alex, which is actually a very, very good product in US, it is of course one of our platforms. But this is actually collecting data all along, right? So our students actually are doing exercise, the kind of mistake that they made. How do we actually collect all this data to be able to actually always improve the experience, right? And improve the outcome, right? And of course, always make a much more personalized actually learning and journey, right? And that's really actually the idea. We are actually now, and this is actually a big change for us, because 10 years ago, there was nobody actually in the education space actually doing a machine learning or building algorithm, right? But this is actually now what we are. This is actually our commitment to the actually education community to actually do and bring these AI capabilities. But that's require actually a lot of data to be collected. But our product are being designed to actually collect those data now, and this is actually to just improve the overall experience and create actually a much more personalized journey for every student. But again, when we talk about AI, that's why I make the differentiation, right? A quick assessment is the very beginning. That's something that everybody can do. Collecting data all along is not something actually that everybody can do.
Thank you. So there's a glimpse of the future of personalized learning enabled by some AI at one end, and the need to keep that intention with an inclusivity agenda at the other end. We're drawing to a close, and I'm keen for us to finish on time. If you look in the chat facility, you'll see a link to a survey thing about the award gap, which I would encourage people to consider filling in. That's very kind. I'd like to thank our three speakers, Caryn and Tony and Leila, for really excellent, thought-provoking contributions. And I think my takeaway thought from today's conversation is that Caryn challenged us to think, well, is it really relevant to rank order the class anymore when you've got the kind of metrics of personalised learning that Tony's just been talking about? And if that's true for our students, then I think the rebellious part of me thinks, is it true for our schools too? And do we really have to be rank ordered from the best place to study this to the worst place to study that, given that we all have such diverse missions and customers and stakeholders in relationships? So I hope that that's given you a glimpse into the changing nature of business education around the world from the perspectives of the AACSB, from one of our key partner organisations who might provide learning content for us, and from the perspective of an individual school. So thank you to Caryn and Tony and Leila for your time. Thank you to you as an audience for turning up. And thank you to Oliver and the Chartered ABS for putting on a great conversation. And in the tradition of these things, I'd like to wave goodbye, because I'm going to think when we eventually do get back to meetings, will we sit up at the table and say, thanks for coming, bye. But have a great afternoon wherever you are. I hope you enjoy the rest of the festival. Thank you, folks.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you so much.